Let's make this clean, simple game day poster. I'm gonna start by bringing in my player cutout. So we've got this DC versus New York game day poster. Making a new layer underneath, we're gonna start with our shadows. So I've got my brush settings set to the super flat horizontal brush, and the flow, we've got the percentage super low. 2% should be good. And just with a black brush, I'm gonna brush in parts near both players' feet, and we want the darkest parts of the shadow being where the feet touches the ground, and then gradually increasing. You can use the bracket keys as a shortcut to increase or decrease the size of your brush. And then over to Ben Katz's feet. Now he's a little bit in front of Joe Merrill, so I'm going to drop the shadow a little bit lower, and it's going to be less dark of a shadow because his feet are in the air. You can also hit Joe Merrill's knee is a little lower than the rest of his body, so maybe we put a little bit of a shadow there. Then the rest is just going to be like kind of subtle, soft shadows that are kind of going through both players. Now let's run our players through Camera Raw filter, going up to Filter, Camera Raw filter, and we'll just do some basic adjustments, starting with the lighting. We can brighten them up a little bit with exposure. And I typically decrease the highlights, increase the shadows, especially with black jerseys. I know that gives a good bit of detail. You can also lower the blacks a little bit. And of course, texture and clarity. Always want to bump that up a good amount. Now for detail, I want to increase the noise reduction just so we get kind of this like smooth look to the cutouts. And then if you increase the sharpening, it can accentuate those edges. So we can play with the skin tones a little bit. I'm just going to add a selective color layer, clip it to our cutout layer just by holding Option and hovering in the space. And now with the reds, I want to lower the cyans so we get more of like the popping of the skin tones. You can also decrease the yellows maybe a little bit, and if you lower the blacks, it kind of ups the brightness of the skin tones as well. Nothing too extreme, just kind of subtle adjustments. And for our background, we're going to bring in this New York City image I got from unsplash.com, and we can keep it sized to fit the full width, but I want to crop it down. So just with my rectangular marquee tool, I'm just going to drag a rectangle across. Maybe we crop it like here, just the bottom chunk. If you hold Option and click the layer mask, it's going to remove that selection from whatever our layer is on. So got our New York City background, and then we're going to add a gradient map on top of it. So clipping the gradient map so it's only affecting this layer, I'm going to bring the black and white closer together. And this is going to give it this like high contrast look, and it's even going to fade out the sky, like the top of the image. So now we're just getting the building detail in the background, which I think gives it a cool feel. I'm going to bring this up a little bit more, and then we're going to add a text layer. Hit T for your type tool. We'll type out Gameday, and the font we're using is good old Times New Roman, regular. I guess this is normal Times. It's not Times New Roman, but they kind of look the same to me. We're going to decrease the spacing. I'm going to even go lower to -40. You can just do that in your character panel, and then we'll blow this up. We'll add a period too. We want to make a statement. This is Gameday, DC, New York. It's a big one. And then bringing up my grids, I just want to make sure this is the same 3-box margin from either side. So just centering this, can go a little bit more on the left. And we'll have a little bit overlapping with the cutout. Not too much, but kind of helps the cutout feel like it's popping off the page if you put the text behind. So just convert the Gameday to smart filters. We're going to add a Gaussian blur to it, so it makes it look even more in the background. 3 pixels is good. And then while we're at it, we'll do the same thing to our New York City background as well. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Next up, we'll create our logo matchup at the top of the design, bringing in our New York and DC logos. We'll size this down using our transform. Transform, by the way, shortcut is Command T. And we'll just do like a little VS positioned in the middle for verses, and we'll shrink this down a good bit so it's not really the focal point, but still there, and we can even shrink the logos down some more too. Matchup at the top, call it matchup, group it in a folder. I'm also gonna convert this for smart filters. We can give this a little bit of a blur too. can see how that looks. Maybe less of a blur. Blurring everything is just going to keep the emphasis on our main cutouts, which I think gives a cool effect to the whole graphic, just keeping everything a little bit out of focus, except what we care about. Now finally, we'll add some text to the bottom. Again, new layer. We're going to type out the matchup information. So we'll say DC Breeze versus New York Empire. Hit space twice, make a slash, space twice more. We'll say 7 p.m. Same thing, and they'll be playing at Joseph F. Focina Field. And we're gonna bring this font size down to like 12. That might be too small, but I kind of want to give it this like small spaced out look, almost typewriter-y font when it's this small. Let's keep the same width as the Gameday, so I can even bring it up just so we can get exact. And we'll bring it back down. And we'll do the same 3-box margin. So from the bottom, we've got 2 boxes and a little half. Let's tack on some finishing effects. So I'm gonna make a folder, call it finishing, and we'll start with a new layer, select the whole screen, hit W and right click to fill the whole thing with 50% gray. We'll convert it for smart filters and then add some noise, 10% should work. And then we'll set this blend mode to hard light at 50% opacity. And then we can also lift the blacks of this whole design just by making a curves layer, adding some points. I also want to add a color lookup. Go into our adjustment layers, color lookup. There's this 3-strip look that I feel like is nice. It brings out all the colors pretty heavily. I don't want it so extreme, but like 40% is going to be a good look. And then lastly, I have this light filter overlay we can drag in. This was from unsplash.com. I think I just looked up light leak or light overlay, and you can find some cool stuff there. So if we set this blend mode to screen, bring down the opacity a little bit, just kind of this subtle glow over the whole image. And now before we activate these finishing effects, I want to run this whole thing through Camera Raw filter. So let's go Command Option Shift E to stamp the whole image as we're looking at it onto its own layer. Then we're going to convert that image for smart filters, and then going up to filter, Camera Raw filter. This is where we'll create some master effects on the whole thing. So can brighten it up a little bit more. And if I lower the highlights, we're getting some more detail in the clouds, which is kind of nice. The shadows, of course. Kind of follow a similar protocol here as I do with the cutouts initially, but a little bit more texture and clarity. Doesn't seem to hurt. And then vignetting I typically bring down. It just kind of brings the focus to the center of the design, where of course we have our main cutouts. And then we'll reapply those finishing effects, and we are all set. Super basic Gameday graphic. I think the fact that it's a 2-player cutout really helps bring the design to life. This would not look as interesting if this wasn't like an interesting action photo of 2 players going for the disc. I think a good takeaway is to use Gaussian blur to create some depth in the design and to draw the viewer's eye where you really want them focusing. Hopefully this helps inspire your next design. As always, let me know if you have any questions.